Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, into my 2024 Penn State football season recap video. My name is Connor Griffin. I am now in this room again for the first time, I think since I did my 2024 season preview back in August, a couple months ago. So I figured I'd come back in here for the grand finale. I apologize if the audio setup isn't that great. I wanted to try and put on the headset and use the microphone, but I also am not good with technology, so maybe I'm doing it wrong. But hopefully it sounds good. Hopefully we go out with a bang here. This will be a longer episode because it will be my last episode of doing this podcast, rambling sessions, whatever you want to call them, for 2024. I'll take the offseason away, and I'll still be thinking about Penn State football nonstop. Don't get me wrong. 2025, I cannot wait for 2025 already. And we'll get into everything going into, the news cycle these past couple of days, whether it's players returning, transfer portal additions or departures. We might have a new defensive coordinator by the time I post this. I'm recording this on Wednesday, the night of January 15th. Probably will be posting it the next morning, so we'll see what happens. I don't know. It's been absolute chaos in the news cycle, and I'll touch on all of it in a second. And when I say in a second, the back half of this video, maybe I'll timestamp it. If you guys just want to get to that stuff, the recent stuff, then I'll put it down there in the description, and you guys can just skip ahead to that. But first, I want to talk all about this 2024 year before getting to next year. This was such a fun Penn State football season. Obviously ended in heartbreak. We fell short, and we probably should not have fallen short in the way that we did, but still, incredibly exciting year. 16 games. We've never seen a season like before. We go 13-3, playing some real big-time games. Big Ten championship, 3 playoff games. It was awesome. It was awesome to watch. And I didn't really have that many expectations for this team coming in. So they definitely exceeded the expectations that I had. I said the ceiling for this team was 11-1. Losing to Ohio State, I did not see any possibility that we would beat them. But the floor coming into this year for me was like 7-5. I did not think that was out of the realm of possibility. I thought, and we'll get into the offense right now. Essentially, this video is going to be grading the offense, the defense, the special teams, talking about key players, key moments, areas of strength, weakness, overall, just how I thought this team performed this year. This offense from 2023 made such a huge leap. 2023, I labeled it as the most disappointing year of my Penn State football life. Given how much talent we had on that team and the coaching staff and everything, I couldn't believe that we came out that inept in so many big games. The defense more than held up their end of the bargain. Don't get me wrong. The defense was a national championship level defense, but offensively, we were abysmal. We were uninspiring, uncreative, bland, boring. I mean, it was brutal to watch for a good chunk of that year, especially in the big games against Ohio State, Michigan, and Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl. So we fire Mike Yurcich. We can him before the season's even over. And it all relied on Andy Kotelnicki, who had a massive undertaking to transform this offense. And on paper, it was an even worse offense than last year. I mean, think about it. Think about all the talent that you lost on the offensive side of the ball last year. I was never really a big fan of Keandre Lambert-Smith. I hated the big play Dre mantra and all that type of stuff. I thought it was a bit of a head case, and now you see it. You see what he's tweeting about the team when he's not even on the team anymore. He's at Auburn. Why are you focused on Penn State? Glad that, as a culture fit, we got rid of him and he's no longer an issue, but you can't deny that he was our best receiver last year. Never thought he should have been a wide receiver 1, but because of how deficient we were in that receiver room, he had to be. We lose him in the transfer portal. We lose Olu, one of the best offensive linemen we've ever had. We lose Hunter Norzad at center, who was very reliable. And then you lose Theo Johnson to the draft, who was tied for maybe the best target that Drew had last year, him and Tyler Warren. Really, we lost a ton. And on paper this year, it was a worse offensive roster. Andy Kotelnicki comes in, and he completely transforms it. He says, I'm going to turn Tyler Warren into the centerpiece of this offense. He's going to be the engine. He's going to be the catalyst, and we're going to do some crazy things. Sure enough, we did. His offense, just in terms of the formations and the playbook and the shifts and the motions and everything, I couldn't believe how different it was from last year. And it really makes you beat your brain. How did we put up with that offense from last year? It was so boring, and it was so chew clock and win time of possession and don't turn the ball over, ball management. we had a Ferrari, and I made this analogy before, a Ferrari or a Lamborghini in Drew Aller, and we were only like really driving him around in 25-mile-per-hour speed zones. We didn't unleash him at all. We didn't let him throw it deep, and obviously that was a big point of contention with James Franklin and reporters last year. We never threw the ball deep with Drew. Never took any shots. He's doing this dink and dunk type of style offense, and it totally hindered his development as a quarterback. He was a 5-star recruit, got in 10 games as a true freshman. Obviously, they were later in games, and their reps against second stringers and everything, but it's still valuable game reps. And now you have him in your first year as a starter, and he should explode. We've been waiting for this guy, and it was just very underwhelming, and I never got any sense in 2023 that he had a sense of self, a sense of identity in that offense. I never got the sense that he was comfortable or had any confidence. He comes out first week with Andy Kotelnicki against West Virginia and was just a completely different quarterback. Completely different quarterback. He's trash-talking. Feels like he has a really good command of the offense, even though it was all over the place. And you have, people lining up at center who aren't supposed to line up at center. You have two quarterbacks. You're shifting in offensive linemen. You have running backs lining up in wild. You had all of these moving parts. You have to give a huge credit to Drew. You have to give a huge credit to Bo. You have to give a huge credit to Tyler Warren and to everybody on this offense. You couldn't really spot many times this year where we had false starts or illegal shifts or people weren't lined up properly and we had to call timeout or we had delayed games because we couldn't get everybody set. It rarely happened. We never looked discombobulated after the ball was snapped and maybe people aren't on the same page. They ran this offense to near perfection. And maybe, yes, Kotelnicki was right where he said it was like a blizzard, a Dairy Queen blizzard, where you have the toppings and all the stuff mixed in. But at its core, it's simple. It's vanilla ice cream. They got it. And it was so amazing to see that week one. I was like, strap yourself in. This is going to be something special. We are entirely different. And Drew was an entirely different quarterback. And we're launching the ball downfield, and he's making these deep throws, and he's putting it on a dot, these NFL passes. He's running the football. And I was really scared of his ability to run coming into this year. They were saying he's losing 10 pounds. He's going to run the football more. I thought we handled it perfectly. And there were plenty of times where, sure enough, there's nobody open downfield. Receivers can't create any separation. Okay, let's just tuck it and run with Drew. It worked. Everything was working. And, that first game, it was crazy. And, the fact that he just had this confidence all of a sudden that he carried throughout the rest of the regular season. He finished 71.6% completion percentage in the regular season. Finished top 10 in the country in completion percentage. Also, this offense as a whole, before I forget, we were 73rd in yards per play last year. We finished 16th this year in the country, 16th in yards per play. So we were more explosive, and we were moving the ball downfield more, and we really unlocked Drew Aller. There wasn't a single game this year, too, and it's largely because of the scheme. These were not great receivers, but we still managed to get them open, and also majority of the time, we were finding ways to get the ball to our other star playmakers. Like I said, Tyler Warren was a catalyst for this offense, and he was by far the number one target. Nick Singleton and Katron Allen got them involved in the passing game, too. We were putting Drew in situations where he could succeed, and he didn't have a single game this year in the regular season with under 60% completion percentage. Had a couple games where he was up in like the 80s. Crazy. But Purdue, he went 17 of 19. Now, you look at his stats. Everything for the most part was up. Touchdowns, he finished with one less. But completion percentage, way up. Yards per pass, yards per attempt, way up. QB rating, way up. Interceptions were also up. And you could say, that's a bad thing. And obviously you could point to the terrible interception he had to end the season that lost us the game against Notre Dame. But I was, for the most part, pretty happy with the fact that he was throwing more interceptions. That was one of my biggest gripes from 2023. You never gave him an opportunity to learn. You were handcuffing him, and you were putting like these training wheels on him. Let him go. Let him make mistakes. Let him learn from them. Let him rip it, and if it turns out not to be good in our favor, okay, he won't make that mistake again. It's like Josh Allen. This is really one of the first years where Josh Allen hasn't been throwing a lot of picks, but that was always the knock against Josh Allen. He throws a lot of picks. Well, okay, he makes insane plays to offset it. And would you rather have a gunslinger who has a rocket of an arm and is utilizing it to the best of his ability, but making some mistakes, or somebody who you're just going to sit back there as a robot who's not going to turn the ball over, but he's also not going to launch it, and you're not going to get anything out of his skill set. I take the first guy. I take the Josh Allen gunslinger type of guy, and that's what I felt like Drew Aller was a lot more of this year. His best games, his two best games, you can make the case that Oregon was the best game that he's ever played at Penn State. Threw 2 picks, and both of them were terrible. That first one in particular, the first one where we're deep in our own territory, and he sets Oregon up at the 1. That was a terrible throw. Might have been a miscommunication, might have been a wrong route by a receiver, but still, bad throw, came back to bite us. But you take that because the rest of the game, he was spectacular. USC, I think personally, that's the best game he ever played. He threw 3 picks in that game. One of them was a Hail Mary at the end of the fourth quarter that he was just chucking up on a prayer. But he was turning the ball over in that game. But he was also making some unbelievable plays because you let him go. You had confidence in him. That's all I'll say about that. For anybody who's picking apart the interception and everything, this is what he should have been doing all along last year. You robbed him of a learning opportunity, many learning opportunities in his first year as a starter. So unfortunately, you had to deal with it in his second year as a starter. And that's why I think going into this final season for him, it's so good that he's coming back for his senior season because he still is very raw. He still is learning a whole lot. And you saw that come out in the big games. I pointed out in the regular season how his completion percentage was great, 71.6%. It did fall all the way to 53% in the 4 postseason games he played. Big Ten championship and then the 3 playoff games. He didn't have a single game in those 4 games where he was throwing for over 60%. He was under in every single game. So the accuracy was off. He started to get a little bit in his head. Wasn't necessarily the best at identifying pressure and moving properly in the pocket and assessing and trying to find the right read right off the bat. He struggled. And obviously you saw it in that Notre Dame game. That was the worst game he played all year. Part of it, I do think, is because of the receivers. But part of it, I do think, is the fact that it was his fault in a way. You look at the mechanics, and this is stuff that popped up a lot in his first year as a starter. You go to the film study and everything like that for the blog he does and Landon Tangwall does. They're great. Shout out to them. Go check them out. There are plenty of times in these bigger games, this specific season, where he reverts back to tendencies that he had in his first year as a starter. Bad footwork, happy feet. He's like almost skipping into throws, and he's not really firing it in. He's not getting his feet set. He's like lofting it and almost doing this weird like jump step. I don't know exactly what it was. It happened a couple times in the Notre Dame game, and they both resulted in interceptions that were thankfully wiped off the board because of pass interference or holding. Also, he does drift. You see it pop up out of the pocket sometimes. He'll drift left. I don't know if it's because he assumes that there's a rush coming, but in reality, he's got a perfectly clean pocket, and he's got plenty of time, and the offensive line is doing their job. He's creating a situation where he's putting himself in danger by drifting a little bit, and now it's easier for the pass rushers to get to him. So there's some stuff mechanically that he does need to fix. I think a lot of it is mental, and hell, it happened with Christian Hackenberg, not to compare the two, but a good part, I'd say the main reason, the main part of why Christian Hackenberg's demise happened at Penn State was because of the mental component. And he couldn't trust anybody on the offensive line to block for him because he was getting sacked all the time, and it completely ruined his mental clock. It ruined his footwork. It ruined everything because mentally he really struggled. I think here you saw Drew Aller struggle mentally because he could not trust that he had a single person to throw to, especially in these bigger games where the defenses are better and it's harder to scheme guys open. And they know if we take Tyler Warren out of this game as best as we can, these receivers for Penn State aren't doing anything. That's what happened. So I think overall he did revert back to some of those bad tendencies, but he still showed a lot of flash. I mean, that Boise State game, he threw 3 passes in that game, 2 of them for touchdowns, that were some of the best throws I've ever seen. He still got that in him. He still got that dog in him. He won us a lot of games this year we should not have won. I say a lot. He won us a couple. The USC game, that is not a game that we win without Drew Aller. Run game was terrible in that. The defense was allowing a lot of points. They put you partially in a 20-6 hole. Part of that was because you didn't come out offensively and play a great first half, but still coming out of a hole. And it really was all on Drew and Tyler Warren. Just get us back in the game, and they did it. Minnesota, we don't win that without Drew Aller. His moxie, his confidence, it was so good in those two games, and he was firing, and he was moving us down the field. And in a game where both games, we were down by multiple scores, 2 possessions, he gets us back, drop of a hat, and all of a sudden wins us the game. He was spectacular in the regular season. Obviously had problems in the big games. That is a hurdle he'll have to get over. But he was having struggles week to week last year. Fixed that and was spectacular in the regular season. Now it's just a matter of getting over the hurdle of those big games, which another year in Kotelnicki's system, another offseason of film study, and living with the fact that he did kind of cost us the game against Notre Dame, and that was a fully reasonable game to win, and we should have won that game. It was not, out of the picture. We had it. And he kind of blew it for us. Living with that for an entire offseason, I think, is really going to inspire him and motivate him. At least I hope it does. And I can't wait to see what he comes out with next year. Still, all the faith in the world in Drew Aller. All the faith in the world. I think he's really going to put it together. And I do think he will not only be the first quarterback taken off the board in 2026, I think he could be just overall the number 1 pick, regardless of position. So very excited to see what he does next year. But yeah, the jump that he made from year 1 as a starter, phenomenal. I loved watching Drew Aller. I still think he's the most talented quarterback I've ever seen at Penn State. Moving on to the running backs. Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen here. Really odd season. Very topsy-turvy. Started off the year, those first 2 games against West Virginia and Bowling Green, really hot. Nick Singleton in particular. They were getting the explosiveness back, which we had zero explosiveness at all last year, either in the pass game or in the run game. Nick Singleton, his longest run of 2023 was only 24 yards. We got that back. Then they go through some injuries. Nick Singleton had to miss the UCLA game. Kaytron Allen got banged up and bruised, maybe as a result of the more significant carries in Nick's absence or when Nick was coming back from injury. Whatever the case was, they were never right at the same time. And I already brought up how in USC and Minnesota, we sucked at running the football. That Minnesota game, we only had 2 yards in the first half. Or not 2 yards. We had 10 yards rushing between those 2 guys in the first half of that game. Just really, really odd. And it was largely on Drew to move us along. Then it totally flipped in the postseason where Drew wasn't necessarily coming out and performing as great as he was in the regular season, but we could absolutely rely on these 2 guys, Nick and Kaytron, to move us down the field because they were bullying people. Absolutely bullying people. Something, a switch was flipped in that Big Ten championship game. Something changed because all of a sudden, you look at Nick Singleton. He was averaging 4.8 yards a carry in Big Ten play and then 7.5 yards a carry in the postseason. And when I say postseason, those 4 games, Big Ten championship and the 3 playoff games. So that was a massive jump. He had as many touchdowns in the playoff as he did in Big Ten play as a whole. I think it was 5. 5 in the playoff, 5 in Big Ten play. And then Kaytron, prior to the Big Ten championship game, he was averaging 2.5 yards a carry in those 3 games prior to Oregon. Then he comes out in Oregon, SMU, and Boise State, and he was averaging 7.8 yards. Those 3 games in December, he was averaging 7.8 yards a carry. Just absurd. Something switched in that Oregon game where Nick's running for 10 yards a carry and Kaytron's running for 8.5 against a very good Oregon defense. This was the number 1 team in the country at that time. I don't know what it was. You got to give credit to Kotelnicki. I imagine he found something that really worked, and these guys for once this season were both healthy at the same time, and it was the best football that they've ever played at Penn State. Their freshman year was amazing. And the Thunder Lightning duo was so cool. And Nick Singleton's reeling off 87-yard runs in the Rose Bowl. And Kaytron is leveling dudes. This was way better than any of that in 2022. They were on fire in those final 4 games of the season. And it was really it was shocking to see. I wasn't expecting it. I thought it was all going to have to be on Drew. It got to a point in the Boise State game where you were yelling at your TV, quit throwing it with Drew. You have Kaytron Allen. He's the answer. He's dominating this team right now. Keep feeding him the ball. You win by 40. And that is a knock against Kotelnicki, if I haven't said it already. He came in with a genius offensive plan. But there were times this season where you felt like he was getting a little bit too creative, a little bit too cute, a little bit too smart. And he could have just kept it simple, stupid, like in that Boise State game, and you would have found much more success. We played with our food a little bit. But still, these running backs, even in the Notre Dame game, they got a really significant amount of carries, but you're still saying at the TV, give them more carries because they were moving us up and down the field in the biggest games against the biggest opponents. So It was an amazing season for the two of them. They found something that they had not had since their freshman season, and they built upon it, and they are now, way better than I ever imagined them being as Penn State running backs. We'll see what happens in 2025. Not to spoil the back half of this video, but we will get to them returning in 2025 because that was major news that I also could not believe that we're getting both of these guys back. So that was amazing to see. The tight end room was phenomenal as well. Well, first of all, I'll give credit to the offensive line. We're talking about how good the run game is. This was the best offensive line that we've ever had under Franklin, and it was so good despite the fact that it was a 16-game season. It was the first time we've ever played anywhere near this amount of games, and you figure, especially the offensive line got pretty banged up. I think of guys like Anthony Dunca, who was really, really banged up towards the back half of this season, had to miss the rest of the season at one point. We were not necessarily scot-free injury-wise on the offensive line. We got banged up. We had to move some pieces around, and still, throughout the course of a 16-game season, we flourished on the offensive line. We got a lot better up front, and a lot of these guys are young. A lot of these guys are going to be coming back, so that's great to see. Nolan Rucci is a guy in particular. We fit him in. This was a project. He was considered a project coming from Wisconsin. Never really hit at Wisconsin, just for whatever reason, it didn't work out. He's a Pennsylvania boy, though. We bring him back to his Pennsylvania roots, and we put him in the Phil Troutwine system, and he did a phenomenal job. Again, in the biggest games, against the biggest opponents. I was floored by how well the offensive line played, and they created those avenues and created those holes for Nick and Katron, and it was great to see. Tight ends also did a great job blocking. I'd have a hard time finding a better room of tight ends, even after we lose Tyler Warren moving into next season. This is one of the best tight end rooms in the country, and they're all complete tight ends. Tyler Warren, though, I'll just rattle off the stats and accolades. I don't know why did I say accolades right there? Accolades. He was historic. Most receptions, most touchdowns, most yards from a tight end in Penn State history ever. The 17-catch, 2000, what am I saying? I'm now starting to completely flub up. The 17-catch, 224-yard game against USC. I thought it over. That's the best individual performance I've ever seen from a Penn State player. Originally, I was thinking Saquon against Iowa 2017 might be better. No, because Saquon, it's a lot easier to get him the ball as a running back. Now, we were obviously incorporating Tyler Warren into the offense in a lot of unique ways to get him the ball, whether it's lining him up at center or giving him the ball in Wildcat. But still, 17 catches, that's having to line up and get open. The fact that he was open 17 times, goes for that much yardage, it was the best performance I had ever seen from a Penn State player. I'm very curious to see where he gets drafted. It was an absolute joy to watch him play. We were so blessed to witness the Drew Aller, Tyler Warren connection. It was absurd. And I think Tyler Warren now is one of my top 10 favorite Penn State football players of all time. Just remarkable. I should release that list soon. I'm gonna do that. That's a good note, Connor. Thank you. Yeah. And now you look at Khalil Dinkins, who I thought specifically in that Notre Dame game showed some good signs. He's been kind of under the radar this year, but he's another great blocker. And he's somebody who came up with some big catches when Tyler Warren, he was sidelined. We thought he had a concussion, so I'm excited to see what he does. And Luke Reynolds. I was watching the Notre Dame game in the cave with my fellow Barstool employees here, and Big Cat, he looks at me and he goes, "You guys have another Tyler Warren? You guys have a mini Tyler Warren that you've had cooking up in a lab now, and Tyler Warren goes for the draft, but it's fine because you have Luke Reynolds?" Kind of. I don't think he's going to be used in the same, Swiss Army knife type of role as Tyler Warren, but he's still a very athletic guy, 5-star, showed up big in the limited moments that he got. And, I think back to Minnesota, that 4th and 1, where he's taking the direct snap and running it for 30 yards. Dude made the most of his time, and I'm very excited to see how he develops. Also, Andrew Rappelier. Rappelier was supposed to be the second guy on the depth chart at tight end. He was injured this entire season. Look out for what he does next year. Got Olesh coming in. So, everything about this tight end room is awesome. And yes, losing Tyler Warren is a massive loss. The guy finished 7th for the Heisman, for crying out loud, as a tight end. But I feel very confident with where this tight end room is at the end of this year. Not so confident with the wide receivers, though. You guys were waiting for me to talk about the wide receivers. Their production this year went down even more from last year. Landon Tangwall put out a great video, too. Not to bring up Tangwall again, but he said, like, year by year, these numbers are dropping drastically when it comes to production from the wide receivers, catches, everything. They were obviously devised around in this offense. We were not trying to draw up plays necessarily to really make them the forefront of this team. No, it was Tyler Warren and the running backs. That was pretty much it. Harrison Wallace, I thought, made some pretty significant strides. The main thing I was looking for from him was, can he just stay healthy? He was banged up for so much of 2023, missed so much time, and you just couldn't rely on him. Here, I think he played in 14 of the 16 games, so that was definitely a big plus. That West Virginia game, I legitimately thought, we got our number one receiver. This guy's going to be awesome. And now you unleash Drew, and he's got somebody to throw to. This connection between Drew Aller and Harrison Wallace is going to be electric. And he just wasn't consistent throughout the entirety of this year. Didn't have that on a week-to-week basis. Still, I don't think had a reliable set of hands. Dropped a couple passes. That Boise State game. Dropped a touchdown pass. Yeah, it was a tough catch. Still could have caught it. And if you are an elite receiver, you do catch it. You do, if you're an elite receiver, catch that ball, the fade to the end zone against Ohio State that instead gets ripped from him, and it's an interception. Like, he made strides, but still, he was not a reliable number one. Amari Evans, he's great at burning you down the field, but he's not necessarily a great route runner. You saw that. I think you partially saw that on the last play of the game offensively against Notre Dame. Like, he's not a guy who's going to shake you. He's not somebody who's going to create space for himself. He is going to be somebody who can create space down the field by just running straight past you if you're in man coverage. But against better defenses, again, who can scheme for that type of stuff, it's not going to work out that way. So I think they really, really struggled. There were plenty of times where they just gave up on the play. Trey Wallace in particular, if you watch those film studies I was talking about, gave up on the route, just stopped running it, or didn't run the right route, or didn't run it hard enough. Just was not the most reassuring thing to see on tape from these receivers. And you saw in the biggest games, they just couldn't create separation. And a guy like Julian Fleming, you brought in to make a real difference in that receiver room. And you can say that the transfer turned out to be a really good thing, and it paid off fully because of just the USC game alone. We don't win that game without those 2 catches on 4th down from Julian Fleming. And if we don't win that game, we probably don't make it to the playoff. So that he showed up big time there, and he stepped up in a big way. But as a whole, he was really, irrelevant in the pass game this year. Almost a non-factor. Blocking, everybody was pointing out how good of a blocker he is, and that's I don't want that to be overlooked. He was phenomenal on the outside, on the perimeter, and making sure that we were keeping blocks and making sure that we could get downfield on the run game and everything. But that's not why we brought him in. We brought him in to be a veteran presence, which he still was, but more so to be a reliable set of hands for Drew Aller when, at the time, he didn't have any. And that was not even necessarily close to being the case. I thought he was going to be our number 1 receiver. He was maybe our number 4. That was a big bummer. And now you've missed on 3 straight people in the portal at receiver. I don't want to say this was a full miss because locker room-wise, I think Julian Fleming was a really good fit, and he was an experienced leader, and he's a Pennsylvania guy and everything. But Dante Cephas was a dud. Dante Cephas did not pay off at all. And then Malik McClain, who ironically you just saw playing in the playoff for Arizona State, he turned out to be a bust as well. So I don't know. Let's get back to the Mitchell Tinsleys. Let's get back to those guys that do pay off from the transfer portal because we need them bad. We need them really bad. And I'll just get into this. I know I said I was going to get into the transfer portal stuff and all the news going around for the past couple of days at the back half of this video. But Harrison Wallace has entered the transfer portal. Amari Evans has entered the transfer portal. Mekhi Flowers, a couple other people on the depth chart at receiver have decided to leave and enter the portal. We're cleaning house at that position, which I was not fully expecting. I knew a lot of these guys would leave. I did think there was a chance, though, that Trey Wallace would stay because he was still the number 1 guy at receiver. It was an underwhelming year, but he still got enough attention, I thought, that would keep him at least a little bit content. And if we came in with a new group of receivers this year and we improved in that room and he could fit into more of a role that was suited for him. He's not going to be a wide receiver 1, but if he could be a 2 or a 3, I thought maybe there was a chance we could have kept him. And I would have been fine with that. But He wants to leave. They've gotten a ton of criticism from the outside this year. That's fans. That's national media. That's everybody saying, yeah, Penn State has terrible receivers. They've had to hear that. They've had to work through it. Didn't work out. They decide to leave. And I think for the most part, it's best that we just go scorched earth and start over. We start growing again after, burning the garden. I don't know what they even do. What do they do with that scorch and burn or burn and grow? I don't know what type of agriculture that is. Going to need somebody in the comments to do that. But we just start fully fresh. We just start fully fresh here, and we'll see if Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson from USC are able to come up big for us because we need them to. We cannot waste this Drew Aller era because he doesn't have anybody to throw to. So overall, this offense, that was a lot. I apologize. We'll get to the defense in a second, but I give this offense like a B+. It was a really, really solid year considering the deficiencies that you had at receiver. That's really the only thing that keeps this offense from being an A. I thought Drew played great in the regular season, still showed flashes of excellence in the postseason. The run game really found their stride late. Tyler Warren was superhuman and was such a great catalyst for this offense. And the offensive line played great. It was just the receivers that held us back from being an A. But B+. This was a really fun offense. And for the first time in a while, you felt like, oh, we could maybe go into a shootout with some of these top teams and at least make it entertaining or keep it close or maybe even win the game. That's the first time I felt that. Didn't feel it last year. Did not feel that last year at all. So B+ for the offense. We'll now switch to the defense as I switch over the paper. I'm going to rip into this defense. And I've been ripping into them all year. As I said earlier in this video, last year's defense was a national championship level defense. I love everything about what Manny Diaz did with this defense. And you can make the case that Kotelnicki is the best hire that James Franklin ever made, or maybe Joe Moorhead. I still contest that Manny Diaz taking that big swing, going out and getting him after he failed at Miami, but you still knew he had it as a defensive coordinator, saying you don't have to stay here for so long. You can stay here for a year. You can stay here for 2 years. And then if you want to go be a head coach again, go be a head coach. But taking that risk and going out and getting that high profile of a guy in Manny Diaz, it felt like something that Nick Saban would do. And sure enough, it paid off tremendously. And I loved everything that he did with this defense. And last year, I say it was a national championship level defense. The stats back it up. We were, at the top of the stats in almost every single category. And when it comes to national rankings, it was amazing. It was us, Ohio State, and Michigan. And we were just a ferocious defense. I think we lost a lot of that this year. I do. And people were chirping at me. We'll get more into Tom Allen leaving for Clemson later. But I tweeted, I was like, this Tom Allen defense this year, they took a step back. They regressed. And people are saying, you're complaining. You look at the stats, you guys are still top 10 in rush defense and top 10 in total defense and top 10 in yards allowed and blah, 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 blah. That's all true. That's all true. My gripes are within the margins. My gripes are when you watch the game and you're seeing this defense not be able to get off the field. They couldn't do it. Yes, I think we're top 10 in points allowed or top 15 or whatever the case is. I'm sure plenty of people have been tweeting it at me. We're keeping teams out of the end zone, but a lot of the time we were letting them pick up these first downs that they should not have been picking up, and we're allowing time of possession to swing in the opponent's favor, and we're putting our offense in a worse starting field position, and we're losing the complementary football that made this team so good a couple years back. Like 2022, they were a great complementary football team. Last year, they weren't because of the offense. This year, they weren't because of the defense. It totally flipped. It was maddening to watch so many times. And, my God, the soft coverage that we kept rolling out. We had these great corners, great secondary, and we're just gifting these teams 7-yard slant routes here. Zone coverage, they find a soft spot in the zone, 6-7 yards out, they're able to scamper for a first down after they catch the pass. Like, it was nonstop. And Franklin even said in a post-game press conference, he was like, yeah, well, we'll let teams get those slant routes and we'll let them get those underneath routes because we just don't want to we want to make sure that they don't get anything over top. He basically said it out loud. Yeah, but we're fine with them moving down the field on us methodically and putting together these long drives because we're not going to stop them in the short passing game. What are you talking about? It was bizarre. I think this defense really was nowhere near as explosive and ferocious. I just used that word. Nowhere near as efficient and overall fear-striking as they should have been. They had a lot of dudes on this side of the ball. And Abdul Carter, I mean, you see it with him. It went well beyond him. It went to Deni Dennis Sutton. It went to Zane Durant. It went to Jalen Reed. I have to cut Tom Allen a little bit of slack because I do think the loss of KJ Winston at the start of the year really significantly impacted this team for the worse. There was a lot of hype about Abdul Carter. I think there should have been more hype about KJ Winston coming into the year. I loved everything about him as a safety, specifically stopping the run. He was a physical tackler, a sure tackler, and he was somebody who would fly over the field and make plays in whatever capacity. I was so excited to see him, and I do think he was going to be the backbone and the anchor of this defense. So when he went down, Tom Allen really had to shift some stuff around, move some pieces, and make up for that loss, which was a very bad hand to be dealt. So I will cut him some slack there. But, again, going to just this defense being able to get off the field, something really simple. 53rd in third down conversion percentage as a defense. So they weren't great at getting people off the field. They weren't terrible on third down. But still, last year's team, much better. Tied for 81st in fourth down conversion percentage. That's not as great. And then this one's a very, very misleading stat, and I'll explain why I threw it in there because there was an addendum to this. You go to the NCAA stats page, and I'm trying to figure out where we stand in first downs allowed as a defense. We were tied for 113th. We're on the very last page. Now, the main reason for that is because we played in 16 games, whereas a lot of FBS teams only played in 12 or 13. But you do look at a team like Ohio State, who they haven't played in 16 games, but they played in 15. That's pretty close. They're 15th in the country in first downs allowed. And if you look at it per game, if you average it out, they're number one in the country. So there's a big difference there. There's a big gap between us and Ohio State, whereas before, as I said, we were up there with the Ohio States. We were up there with the Michigans, if not better than them in these defensive stats. And it's a problem. We could not get people off the field. And part of it was because of the fact that we were so bad with penalties. I saw this stat for the first time. We were 60th in the country in opponent first downs by penalty. We were giving them yards. We were giving them first downs because of offsides. How many times did we see an offsides penalty this year? For an experienced defensive line, it was crazy. For personal fouls, we gifted Oregon 45 yards pretty much right off the bat because of personal foul penalties. It was bizarre. Missed tackles was also a major problem for this defense, which I know part of that is player personnel, but also it's coaching and teaching them how to wrap up, bring these guys to the ground, and if it's a problem at one point in the year, address it so it's not a problem for the rest of the year. Late in the season, in the postseason, in the biggest games of the year, leading up to the Notre Dame game, those three games before, Oregon, SMU, and Boise State, PFF had us marked down for missing 57 tackles throughout the course of those games. And we did pretty well on Genty. That's outside of that, though. This was against Oregon, where, that defense got exposed. It was against SMU, where you think of that SMU game as like a dominant defensive performance, which is one of my big criticisms of this team and my explanation, which I'll get to in a second. But there were a lot of missed tackles in the game. And there were a lot of missed tackles in the Boise State game, even though, again, you have to give them credit. They did a good job of bottling up Genty. Anyway, my criticism, or rather my evaluation of this defense, they had so many dudes, and they were so physical and so fast and so aggressive just in their nature that was able to mask a lot of the fundamental flaws and weaknesses of this defense and this overall defensive philosophy. That SMU game, the first drive, SMU moved the ball down the field on us pretty easily. They went tempo, and I was like, it's going to be one of these games again where we're going to put ourselves in a hole because the defense comes out flat, and the offense with a scripted drive is able to slice through us like butter, and we're going to go down 7-0. Almost went down 7-0. If that tight end from SMU catches a pass, or if Kevin Jennings, the quarterback, decides on a 4th and 1 to just hold on to the football, run for it instead of throwing it down the field. Thankfully, that goes in our favor, and we're able to really just get after that offensive line, and Kevin Jennings could not handle the pressure. He was so rattled in that whiteout environment and everything. Like, we made up for the missed tackles because we had put him in tough situations, and he's throwing the ball away, and we're picking it off and running it for 6. Like, this defense, if it was creating takeaways and getting after the quarterback, which in turn does create more takeaways, they were solid. They were really solid. If they weren't, though, watch out. You might be in trouble. This defense, they might be in trouble. they got exposed in the Oregon game. They didn't force any turnovers. And Oregon was able to keep the ball and move the ball downfield on us almost every single time. They scored 45 points, the most that we had led up as a defense since 2017. But the Ohio State game, I thought that could have been a rout in Ohio State's favor. But we force a pick six. We force a fumble on Will Howard right as he's about to cross the goal line. And thankfully, we retain the ball after that. But if Will Howard scores that touchdown, I think game's over. Thankfully, we're able to stay in it and buy ourselves some life. It was a miracle that we were able to have a chance to tie that game up at the end. I do not think that the defense played a game that was worthy of winning that game. We also had a luck. I don't know how this happened, but it struck. Luck struck when Jeremiah Smith is slightly overthrown on a deep ball that he's wide open on. And a catch that he usually makes, he doesn't corral for some reason, but he was right in front of the end zone. It was a walk-in touchdown if he catches it. That run game from Ohio State, people criticized, and it was really struggling. And the offensive line from Ohio State was super banged up. I think they had just lost their starting center. And the narrative was, oh, they're not running the ball against Penn State. They did. That 5-minute, 40-second drive, whatever it was, to end the game, it was all running, and we couldn't stop it. This defense was not as good as everybody made them out to be. They were able to out-physical people. They were able to out-quick people and outspeed people. And Abdul Carter was a freak, which did create opportunities for other people. But at the end of the day, I thought they were a very mismanaged football team on the defensive side of the ball, and they did not play up to their potential at all. I give this defense like a C. I give them a C. Maybe a C. No, I'll give them a C+. I'll give them a C+. I do not think that they played up to their potential at all. And, again, their weaknesses were masked just because they had a lot of dudes. And I think part of the reason why Tom Allen is out, which we'll get to later on in the video, is because Franklin knew this defense had way more potential than what they lived up to here. And they took a step back. And I definitely miss Manny Diaz because I was pulling my hair out so much watching this defense throughout the course of the year. Also, I didn't bring this up, just going to starting field position and playing complementary football. You can't pin this all on the defense. You could also blame it on special teams, which we'll get to in a second. We were 117th. This Penn State offense was 117th in the country in percentage of drives started more than 80 yards from the end zone. This is from a website called BCF Toys. I hope this is legit because if so, it validates everything I've thought about this defense. I looked it up. I was trying to find starting field position stats, and this gave me this. That means that there were only 16 or 17 teams who started behind their own 20 more than we did out of all 134 teams in the country. A lot of that was because our defense wasn't getting off the field and wasn't taking it to them. And with all these dudes, they weren't causing these teams to move backwards the way that we did last year. They weren't causing these teams to go 3 and out like we were last year. And we weren't getting the ball in advantageous positions offensively. A lot of the times we're starting deep in our own territory. It was an issue. And we'll just move on to special teams. No, we'll save that for a little bit because I have a lot of things to say about starting field position when it comes to the punt unit in particular. But to wrap up the defense, Abdul was a freak. Finished the season with 24 tackles for loss. Aiden Hutchinson never did that. The Bosa twins never did that. Myles Garrett never did that. He was a monster. And that performance he had in the Notre Dame game, playing with one arm, I'll never forget that. He was sensational in that game, and he was sensational throughout the vast majority of the season, even though last year I thought he hit a real slump. That was back when he was a linebacker, obviously. We moved him to D-end, and he completely exceeded all of my expectations at that position. Denai Dennis Sutton also came through. And that Notre Dame game, again, unbelievable. I can't wait to see what he does next year. Zane Durant, the middle of that defensive line, you can make the case that he was the MVP of the season. Zane Durant was a monster and was so good at clogging up run games and pushing linemen back and collapsing the pocket. It was great to see him play. And again, another guy who's going to be back for next year. And then Jalen Reed honing in on the secondary and really moving all around. He's a guy who I think was put into a really bad spot when KJ Winston went down because we had a certain plan for him, and now all of a sudden we're having to adjust it to make up for the huge void of Winston being out. But He delivered, and as a guy, unfortunately, who's out of eligibility, can't come back for next year. But those 4 guys in particular were great. The linebackers I struggled with. I did struggle a lot with the linebackers. Also, Zachy Wheatley, I should mention, the takeaway king, unbelievable. The linebackers I thought were way too slow. I did not think that they were great linebackers. Kobe King was the closest we got to it. But Dom DeLuca, even though, yes, he had 2, he was the story of the SMU game. 2 interceptions, one of them being a pick 6. Also had a huge pick in the Minnesota game. Just somehow was a magnet for interceptions, which you have to give him credit for being in the right position. But there were plenty of times where he was targeted in the pass game because opposing offenses knew, oh, yeah, this is a mismatch. He's too slow to cover in space. And if we get, it could just be a tight end or a running back. If we get anybody on this guy, we're going to be able to feast. And that's what happened. So I worry about him moving forward. I hope we're able to utilize him more. I think part of the reason why the linebackers struggled was because they weren't utilized in the right situations, and they weren't put in the right situations to succeed. Kobe King was really targeted by the passing attack of Notre Dame. I think he was just put in bad situations by Allen. Like, the scheme wasn't right. And if you notice, Kobe King, now we're just getting fully into people who are returning for next year, leaving for next year, whatever. He declared for the NFL draft, and he put in his letter announcing that he was going to the draft and leaving Penn State, he said, thanks to Coach Franklin, thanks to Coach Manny Diaz, thanks to Coach Brent Pry, did not mention Tom Allen. I don't know if that was a mistake. It might have just been, an unintentional omission, but I think that was personal. And I think, again, part of the reason why Tom Allen might not be here in State College anymore is because, it just did not go great for him this year. So, overall, you know what? C+ might be a little bit harsh. I'm between a B- or a C+ for this defense. Definitely not a B, definitely not an A, far, far, far from an A. But, maybe around that B-, C+. And people get into it, too. It was a B-, a B, technically, because there's a B in front of it. I say no. B-, B- or C+. Anyway, special teams, getting into field position once again. This was a major component to why we were starting so far behind so often, deep in our own territory, because I do not think our punt game was good at all this year. Riley Thompson started to get a little bit more of his stride later on in the playoff, but there were so many opportunities he had to really flip field position in games where maybe it was low scoring, or maybe, we were struggling offensively, and if we're able to pin this opposing offense deep, and then maybe we could get the ball in better field position, and this offense can start to hum because they're working with a shorter field. No, we missed out on it a ton. And if you look at the the average punt yardage, we finished 12th in 2023. Riley Thompson, I thought, had a great year, and I was so excited to get him back for 2024. We finished 87th this year. Huge drop-off. And then I talked about punt return yardage. We'll just get to that right now. We were 26th in 2023 in punt return yardage. Nothing spectacular, but still really solid. 98th this year in punt return yardage. Zion Tracy, we put him back there. Great at catching the football, but never really provided a threat that he was going to house anything. I never thought in my mind, we have a real shot at returning this right here. No. I was like, we'll catch it, maybe get a couple yards, and then we'll get tackled almost instantaneously. It was a bummer. We were really like a net zero in the punt game, both kicking it away and returning it. Like, it was just odd. Such a drop-off from last year, and I don't know what happened. It was the first year with Justin Lustig as special teams coordinator. I don't know if that had to do with it. I don't know. We just did not fully take advantage of that facet of the game, and it was just not a threat at all. Thankfully, kickoffs were all right. We did take another drop back there. 48th in the country, whereas last year we were 21st. But place kicking was, I thought, awesome. Ryan Barker stepping into that role after Sanders Sahadak 2 years straight just was not able to solidify himself as the starting kicker of this program. Ryan Barker fills in, former walk-on. The USC game, he goes perfect. He finished the season 15 of 18 on his field goals. Didn't miss a single one under 40 yards. Was very reliable inside of 40, to quote Chris Fowler. And I think he was 6 of 8 40 to 49, and then he missed his 150-yard attempt. So still working on the long leg ability, the big leg ability, but he was so consistent, and I did trust him almost every single time he was out there. Like I trusted him that he was going to nail it, and he did. And a lot of the time it was straight up the upright, straight through, right down the middle, and you can't take that for granted because we've seen some bad kickers in recent years in Penn State football. So I give the special teams overall as a unit like a C-. Really, like nothing special about the special teams aside from Ryan Barker being a great story. So overall, you look at it, I gave the offense, a B+. I gave this defense a B- or a C+, and I gave the special teams a C-. So I really wouldn't say that we were elite in any facet of the game. People would say maybe the defense was, again, as I pointed out in all those stats, and the overall philosophy of this defense. I don't agree that this was a truly elite defense. But we were just good enough in every single category in a year where it was really strange. And a lot of top teams were falling to inferior competition, and the SEC really dropped off. We were good enough to be among the best teams in the country. It was odd. Last year, I thought this defense was good enough to win us a national championship. Never thought this year that we were good enough to win a national championship on defense. This offense, we didn't have one wide receiver to throw to consistently who was a reliable outpitch. Still, this offense was able to flourish for a good chunk of the year. Special teams never really came back to bite us, even though I thought it would. It was really odd. Really odd. I never thought, even as we were 7-0, whatever the case was, I think it was 7-0 when we went into Ohio State, I still didn't think that we were a national championship level team. I would have maybe if we had beaten Ohio State, but never this season did I think, oh, yeah, this team's good enough to win a national championship. I'd say it's one of the best teams that we've ever had at Penn State under James Franklin, where, I think I rank it second best to the 2017 team, and we could get into that in a little bit. There were some people debating about that. I tweeted that out. There were people debating about who should really be number one. But you look at the talent on this team, 24/7 Sports, the team composite had this as the 11th most talented team in the country. It wasn't anything super spectacular. And this junior class was the best recruiting class that James Franklin has ever had. But consistently, outside of that year, he's been like in the 15th to 20th range in terms of recruiting rankings. Like, you can make a case. I already said it to start this video off. I said that this team really exceeded my expectations. This team really overperformed this year. And I think part of it was because they just fought. And I know that's so cliche to say, and it's really not really any in-depth analysis. But the chemistry was there. The leadership, I worried significantly, deeply about the leadership coming into this year because I didn't see any of it last year, and I didn't know who was going to step up. This team felt like it had some leaders, and it felt like it had some dogs. And whatever the case was, whether it's going down to USC or going down to Minnesota or going down to Oregon, like they fought their way back in every single time, and they never quit. And again, they were just good enough in every facet of the game to either hang around or put some pressure on people or go out and win the game outright. Didn't obviously win the big games down the road, and that's part of the reason why people say, oh, yeah, there were no strides being made this year because you still can't beat any competent opponents, and you're exactly where you are, where you're the same old Penn State. Yeah, you beat everybody you're supposed to beat, but you're still losing to the top teams. So how could you say that you got better, or how could you say this was one of the best teams? It was just like every other team. Maybe. But I know, watching this team week in and week out, that they got better, and they learned from their mistakes. The Ohio State game, I was like, oh, my God, we literally are in the same position as 2023 because we came out and the offense didn't score a single offensive touchdown, and we're still struggling to get the ball to wide receivers. Our number one running back in that game was a tight end. Like, it was all just so chaotic. It was like, what the hell was that? What was that performance? And the defense, as I said, I thought they were lucky to only give up 20 points in that game. Yes, you can't take away from the takeaways. You can't not give them credit for those. But I thought that game could have been way uglier than it was. And thankfully, it only turned out to be 20-13. But I left that game thinking, oh, yeah, this team's really no different. And yet, they learned from that game, and they come out. The Oregon loss somehow was like the most reassuring game of the year, even though it was a loss, because we played the number one team in the country, and we took it to them, outgained them, 500 yards, and you had an offense that was good enough to win you a Big Ten championship, and it was the defense that wasn't good enough. And I think that's part of the reason, too, why Allen's gone. I think that 45-point effort from Oregon against this Penn State defense, I think that sticks out. I think that sticks out in James Franklin's mind. But we'll get to that later on. I keep saying that, too. I apologize. But we're going to get to it eventually. Still, yeah, I think they learned from it, and this offense got better, and the run game got better after struggling for a large chunk of the season. Drew Aller got better. Tyler Warren was superhuman. Abdul Carter was a freak, made up for a lot of the flaws in that defense. Jalen Reed, Zane Durant, Denai Sutton, they were dogs, and they never gave up, and they kept fighting, and you got to give a whole lot of credit to Franklin in the sense that he has eliminated the one game a year that we would typically lose that we're not supposed to lose. The 9 overtime game to Illinois, the loss to Michigan State, whatever the case is. We've eliminated that. We beat everybody who we're supposed to beat, and we've done that now for 3 consecutive years. In the Big Ten, outside of everybody except for Ohio State and Michigan, we dominate. And now, given where Michigan is, I think we dominate Michigan. Ohio State is the one bugaboo. But the beauty of it is, after that Ohio State loss, again, I thought that we were in the same spot as we were last year, and there was no improvement, and we brought in Kotelnicki for nothing, and Aller, even though he didn't necessarily, play bad in that game, like we were still going to struggle with him, we were going to waste him and everything. We lose that game, people are booing Franklin, they're wanting him out, and yet we're now in a situation where we still made it to the college football playoff semifinal, and Franklin's getting more buy-in than ever from the university, from the fan base, from the donors, from the boosters, and we're going on a run in 2025. It was crazy. Usually that used to be the dead end. Oh, you can't beat Ohio State? Sorry. We're tired of you, James Franklin. You can never get over the hump. You can never win the big game. Well, now you're seeing in the expanded college football playoff, you could still lose that game, which, don't get me wrong. I want to win that game. I hope we win it next year. But you could still lose that game and find another road to get to where you want to be. And we got a taste of that road. We got a taste of that path. Got a couple plays away from making it to a national championship game, and now you're seeing the buy-in from the people who have the money. So many, we'll get into the guys returning in a second, but so many of these guys who are returning, I don't think they return if we haven't made strides in NIL. I don't think they return if we don't have this massive support now for Franklin and for what this team is trying to build. We're getting $700 million put into Beaver Stadium. We are on the come. We are on the up and up. And I think you're really starting to feel that, even though it felt really bleak after that Ohio State game. We found a way to rally, and we found a way to really make some noise and to really gain some support for this team. And I think going into next year, think about all of the positive hype that you've now created because of what you were able to accomplish in the college football playoff. Yes, there are the people, the naysayers, who say, well, you didn't win a big game, and we'll never trust you to win a big game. But we did put on a show. Put on a show in the Big Ten championship game before we even got to the playoff, and then we put on a show against Notre Dame. That was a classic college football playoff game, and it does linger in people's minds, and you get the benefit of the doubt moving forward when it comes to how this team is viewed and how this team is ranked, and you get to the College Football Playoff Committee rankings at the end of it, and they'll remember, well, Penn State was in it last year, and they did put on a show, and they're a really good team that's returning everybody. You get the benefit of that bias. It's the bias that all these SEC teams have gotten for years. The Alabamas of the world have gotten for years. We expect them to be a part of the conversation. Now I think you expect Penn State to be a part of the conversation because we made it to the playoff, which there were times this season it didn't look like that was the case. It looked like we were going to lose to USC. It looked like we were going to lose to Minnesota. We found a way to come up with a win and fight and scrap and claw and get to that point. It was an incredible run, and now you are going to be at the forefront of college football as a perennial playoff contender. And now that the fan base has gotten a sense of what that's like, yeah, they're invested, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. So hopefully this causes a ton of positive momentum rolling into next year. Think about all the experience that these guys got too. These players and these coaches, they had never played on this stage before, ever. They had never been in the college football playoff, and they got 3 games in the playoff. They got a Big Ten championship game. They got some massive come-from-behind road wins. I didn't even touch on Wisconsin. That was a come-from-behind road win where we didn't have our starting quarterback. That was a gutsy win. They have gotten so much positive experience, and they've won in so many different ways, and now so many of them are coming back, And they're going to have all of that in their repertoire. And when they get to the big moments next year, it's not going to be new to them. And they're not going to be quaking in their boots. Drew Aller, who was nervous and antsy and had happy feet in the pocket. Like, who knows? Maybe he comes out next year and he's not afraid of the bright lights. It's all such positive experience, and we now know what it takes. We now know it's not a 12-game season. It's a 16 or 17-game season. Thankfully, that was not really the struggle. It wasn't like we were banged up or physically we were mismatched or the depth wasn't there. Like, we hung around, and we matched up very nicely with these teams late into the season. And we know what it takes. We know what it takes, and we know the expectation now. So everything, it is so good moving forward. But before I fully get into all that stuff for next year, just to put this season in perspective, I mentioned before, I have this as the second best team in the James Franklin era. I put the 2017 team that went 11-2 and beat Washington in the Fiesta Bowl with Saquon and Deshaun Hamilton and Gesicki and McSorley and Marcus Allen and Kabinda. I put that team as the overall number one team. That team, to me, I did feel like that was a national championship contender team. And it broke me when they lost to Ohio State and collapsed because they had that double-digit lead in that game. It shattered me when they lost to Michigan State in the rain delay and everything. That team, I think, was the only team that had real national championship aspirations coming into the year. I really didn't think that this 2024 team was going to be compete. I knew they would be a contender for the playoff. I did not think they'd be a national championship contender a couple plays away from making it to a natty. But sure enough, they did. And 13-3, and the talent on this team really shined in a lot of different ways. 2016, I have it 3. Yes, they won a Big Ten championship, and yes, they were electric, and the cardiac Nittany Lions, whatever you want to call them. But they also did lose to Pitt, and they did lose really bad to Michigan, 49-10. So you do have to weigh that against them. Then number 4, I have the 2022 team, the Rose Bowl team that beat Utah. I love that team. That was the first year of Singleton and Katron, first year of Abdul Carter. Clifford still under center. They lost badly to Ohio State and Michigan, but every other game they controlled, and they won pretty handily. And then number 5, I won't do the rest of the rankings, but the 2019 Cotton Bowl team that beat Memphis, where, Micah Parsons came onto the scene, and Journey Brown and Noah Kane, the advent of the Lawn Boys. That was a really, really fun team to watch. A team that also, throughout the middle of the year, you're like, oh, this team might win a national championship. Then fell apart, obviously. But regardless, the rest of my rankings are on my Twitter, @RealCGriff, if you want to see them. They caused some debate. There are a lot of people responded to that one, which I thought was funny. But anyway, those are my teams. Those are my rankings and where I rank this specific 2024 team. I think 8 of these games this season are games that I would go back and rewatch in a heartbeat. I'd go back and rewatch the highlights of West Virginia. Dominating them week 1 was awesome. That first taste of this new offense and this new Drew Aller. So many highlight plays from that game. USC, I think, is game of the year. And if you had to pinpoint one moment in the year that was perfection and really meant a lot to this season, it has to be the Bo Perbula to Drew Aller, then to Tyler Warren, who was previously lined up under center. He makes the insane catch in the end zone to get us back into that game and really spark that comeback. Yeah, if we don't have that play, I don't know how different the season is. That was a remarkable play. Great play design. A bit lunatic play design by Kodanicki, but it worked to a T, and I love that USC game. I go back to the game all the time. Wisconsin, a game I was at. I mentioned, another come-from-behind win that was great. Gutsy win on the road in the Big Ten at night. Washington in the whiteout was a terrible broadcast, but we thumped them, and it was fun to watch. Minnesota, love that game. I rewatched that a lot, specifically for Drew Aller, and specifically for that last 4-minute drive that we had where we went for it on 4th down 3 times and picked up every single one to ice the game. The fake punt was awesome. Oregon, I go back and rewatch, even though it was a loss, just because that was an insane offensive performance from Drew Aller, and the running backs were explosive and running all over the field. And then SMU and Boise State, the 2 playoff games before we lost in the playoff, those were other watchable games. So half this season, I'd go back and watch in a heartbeat, whereas there wasn't a single game from last year that I would have an impulse to go watch. So it just goes to show you this was a really fun season. We fell short. Don't really have much to show for the growth that we took and the on-field product getting better because we lost in those 3 big games, but we did come close. And it sounds really sad to say, but we are the closest we've ever been since 1994 to winning a national championship. It's just a matter of getting over the hump and getting one win in a big game. Thought that one win in a big game was going to be against Notre Dame, and even if we got thumped by Ohio State by 30 points, still that would have meant something. Didn't get it. So hopefully next year we rebound and we're in the same spot and we learn from our mistakes and we get better. I think we will absolutely be in the playoff again based off of everybody who's returning. We get Drew back, who, as I said, that is a massive, massive person to get back into the fold so he can learn in his senior year and really develop. I think he was the centerpiece of everybody deciding to come back because now Nick and Katron are back, which was shocking to me. I could not believe that this was the case, mainly because we're in the NIL transfer portal era, and the fact that we got these guys for 4 years sharing touches, sharing money, and they're still totally happy, and they're still totally fine with coming back for another year of that, of not getting their full shine, having to share the backfield with another person. Crazy. Such selfless guys. You could tell they're real friends, and you could tell that they have unfinished business that they want to take care of. Because I also wasn't going to think it was crazy if one of them decided to go to the draft. I thought Nick was probably going to go to the draft. I don't know how much more they have to show. I mean, hell, they've been starting since their freshman year, and they just got done playing their best football that they've ever played at Penn State. Like, go to the draft. I thought that's what absolutely was going to happen, with Nick at least. He decides to come back, and then 5 minutes later, Katron announces he's coming back. I thought if one of them wasn't going to go to the draft and they were going to come back to Penn State, the other one absolutely was going to go chase a bag and get more money at another school where they could be the premier guy. Not the case. Crazy. What Kodanicki's been able to do, what Franklin's been able to do, and what Jaywan Sider has been able to do, retaining those guys, it's going to make such a difference for next year. Now, we will lose some depth, I imagine. I imagine we're going to have some of those guys behind them, the Corey Smiths, the Quentin Martins, the Cam Wallaces. I imagine at least one of them is going to transfer, and I wouldn't blame them. So that kind of hurts me because I did like what I saw from them, even though they were a bit banged up this year. But what are you going to do? You are going for a run for the Natty. You're going all in on this year, and if it means you have to sacrifice some of that depth at that position moving forward, you got to do it. Also returning, Nick Dawkins comes back, which is big. A couple offensive linemen. J.B. Nelson is coming back. This offensive line is going to be, I said this year was the best it's ever been. I think this next year really, really has a chance to take an even further step, and they could be way better than this year. I love what we're seeing out of this offensive line and the fact that it's going to be Nick and Katron running behind them. Yeah, that's awesome. Defensively, Zane Durant, massive comeback. He was one of the first people, and I was shocked, honestly. I was really shocked to see that he was coming back. I don't know how he would fare as a pro, but I know for us, he's perfect. And as I said before, I think he's the MVP of the defense. You can make the case. Zachy Wheatley coming back in the secondary. Smith Vilbert coming back at defensive end. That's a big piece for depth. And speaking of defensive end, I think this person was the biggest domino that you could possibly have fall in our favor. And in my opinion, he was like the last one to fall. Once we got him, the rest was just gravy. I knew once we got denied Dennis Sutton that we were going to be in for something really special in 2025. Yeah, denied Dennis Sutton, deciding to come back and return at defensive end. He's a guy, I also don't know how much his draft stock will improve because I don't know how much he himself has room to improve this season. I think mainly it'll just be he'll have more eyes on him. He's not in the shadow of Abdul Carter anymore, even though Max Granville might be a guy who flashes and bursts onto the scene, and now he's having to share the spotlight with him. But I don't know. I just think he has another round of hopefully another playoff run, more attention, and if he comes out and plays half as good as he played in that Orange Bowl, yeah, he's going to have a sensational year and a year where he'll draw a lot of attention. So he was a guy who was tweeting out back when he was still in high school, Penn State's going to win a Natty in 3 or 4 years. Hopefully he's right. That's part of the reason why I did not see him going to the draft, because I feel like if there was anybody who was under the assumption or under the belief that there was unfinished business to attend to, it was going to be him. He was tweeting out how we're going to win a Natty. He's going to be the best player in college football. Obviously, he didn't really accomplish that. And so he's coming back to try and make sure that we're taking care of business. So that's amazing to see. I think that's all the people who have announced. Oh, well, Dom DeLuca announced, and the special teams guys announced that they're returning, which is all great. You love to see these guys come back, and it's consistency. They're known commodities. And it's really, I talked about how Nick and Katron are oddities in this NIL and transfer portal world, but the whole approach by Franklin, instead of trying to go out and spend money on these people who you think are going to be good, but you really don't know, let's just focus on spending money and retaining the known commodities that we already have. The people, you know their character, you know their work ethic, you know what they bring to the table on the football field. It's now paying off really well, and we'll see exactly how it translates to the football field in 2025, but it's definitely a unique approach because there are a lot of these guys who could have went pro. Katron Allen, I was seeing rumors he was absolutely going to go chase a bag. Now he's coming back. It's an improvement in NIL, I imagine, and it shows the culture that we are building. Also, King Mack is somebody, when you talk about the transfer portal, is a very unique case study. He was on our team. Then he decides to go to Alabama. I don't know if it was for playing time or money, whatever the case was. Didn't pan out for him. Didn't play a whole lot this year. And it stinks because when KJ Winston went down, he would have filled a huge void. He would have played a vital role in that defense. But he decides to leave, go to Alabama. Doesn't work out, as I said. And he says, I want to come back. And James Franklin says, sure, we'll take you. The door's always open. That's rare. I think a lot of coaches would be pretty pissed off and say, are you kidding me? You're not coming back here. You left us. And James Franklin says, no, we recruited you. We love you. Sorry it didn't work out at Alabama, but we're glad you take you back here. And he's done that with Rucci, where we recruited Rucci heavy. He's a Pennsylvania guy, decided to leave Pennsylvania. But if he wants to come back home and leave Wisconsin, we'll take you back. Happened with Fleming. We'll take you back. It's a really, really, as I said, unique and honestly really honorable way of going about it. There's no pride in this. Hey, if you want to help us win games, we'll take you. If you fit, if you're a Pennsylvania guy, if we have a relationship with you already and we know we can trust you, yeah, come in. So it's a tip of the cap to James Franklin. King Mack hopefully is a great addition to this defense next year. And you talk about additions. We need Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross. Kyron coming from USC, Devontae coming from Troy. We need them to hit. And then personally, I think we need one more receiver, especially if we're cleaning house entirely. I don't know who's left at this point, but if we're spending NIL money and we've got an uptick and the boosters are coming in and the donors are coming in because they've got a taste now that we're close to winning a national championship, hopefully there's enough money to throw at a wide receiver who could make a difference because we need it bad. We cannot waste the Drew Aller era. All this is great. We're getting all these returners, and we've now known what it's like, and we've gone on a run, and we got that out of the way. Now it's like 2022 Michigan, or it's like 2023 Ohio State, where they fall short of their goals, and they decide, we're not going to the draft. We're not transferring. We're coming right back here the next year, and we're running it back. And for Michigan, they won the national championship. For Ohio State, they're probably going to win the national championship this year. This is what that feels like. But it all means nothing if you have nobody for Drew Aller to throw to. That needs to be addressed. Hopefully it is. We'll get to Tom Allen right now. And then I don't know how much left there is to talk about because I feel like I've been talking nonstop. Tom Allen decides to go to Clemson. I was starting to warm up to him a little bit. I was starting to give him passes, whereas I was really critical of him throughout the bulk, or at least the opening of this season. Then he decides to do a lateral move. I tweeted this out. I think it's a downgrade. People disagree. They say, Connor, how many championships has Penn State won recently? Look at Clemson. They've won 2 in the last 10 years. This team right now for Clemson is nowhere near a national championship level team. It's not a national championship level program. And you are taking a job in the ACC when you were in the best conference in college football, playing against the big boys. You just had a semifinal run, a playoff push, and you're going to be back in the playoff next year. And you were so close to a natty. Well, now you get a chance with all the same guys to go again. That was the feel. And somehow he decided to abandon it. I know people said it was for personal reasons, that he wanted to go down to the Carolinas. He's got family down there. People were telling me he's about to be a grandfather. I haven't looked into it. I didn't see his press conference from Clemson or whatever the case is. But you knew that your family was down there last year when you took this job. right? Unless they just moved down there, unless they just got I don't know what the case is. And I'm not trying to get too much into his personal life. But if everything was hunky-dory and this defense was as good as everybody made it out to be, as what it was meant to be, what its potential was, if it lived up to that potential and Franklin was satisfied and Tom Allen was satisfied and they had a great relationship, I highly doubt he is leaving this situation to go and play at Clemson. Not play at Clemson, coach at Clemson. I doubt that. We're on the cusp right here, and I think Clemson, yes, they made it to the playoff, but it's because they play in the ACC, and they got an automatic bye, which you could make the case they'll get that bye every single year, but are we really taking Clemson serious as a national championship contender now? They have failed to adapt to the college football landscape. They're not really doing the transfer portal, the NIL. I don't know how it is down there exactly, but I imagine where we are right now, it's got to be more money, more boosters, more donors, more of an alumni base. There's going to be more opportunity. There's going to be more money. I don't think money was the issue here. I think he says it was for personal reasons, but I truly do believe this was Franklin nudging him and saying, hey, we respect you, we love you, we appreciate what you've done, but you might want to look elsewhere. That's what this feels like to me. And that might be totally ignorant. That might be totally wrong, and I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's at least what it feels like to me. I think there was, and that Kobe King letter, I don't want to read too much into that, but that solidified it in my eyes. There was some uneasiness and maybe some friction in that locker room between Allen and Franklin, and maybe the players didn't necessarily warm up to him the way that we had hoped. I don't know. I think there's more to it than just, I have family in the Carolinas, I want to live down there. And I do think, I still contest, by the way, I'm not backing down from that. It is a downgrade. I don't care what Clemson did in 2018. Look at them now. Good Lord. Anyway, we'll wrap it up there. So much to look forward to. I'm not necessarily worried about Tom Allen leaving. I think we could get somebody better in there. Danton Lynn is somebody who's being thrown around, obviously a former Penn Stater. My worry with that, I can't believe I was going to wrap up the video. I didn't even talk about potential replacements. Danton Lynn, and my worry is that he hasn't had a sustainable model. Like, he's bounced around from school to school. He was at UCLA for a year, then at USC for a year. Now we're going to take him from USC. You don't know what exactly it's like for him to be in a system year in and year out and how that translates from year to I don't know. That's what worries me. He's still semi-inexperienced. Then the other name that's been throwing out is Bryant Haynes, from Indiana, who's been with Curt Cignetti, very similar to how Kodanicki had been with Leipold for so long, from stop to stop. This guy, Bryant Haynes, has been with Curt Cignetti pretty much the entire ride. I think he coached at IUP with Cignetti. So that's a name that's also been thrown out as well. Taking a guy from Indiana right after we just took Tom Allen, that's like PTSD. That doesn't sit right with me. But it's a young name. I think he's 39 years old. Somebody who is looking for that next step up, and we could be that place for him. So I don't know. Then, of course, within house, there's Anthony Poindexter, who I think should be the obvious answer. He's somebody who's been thrown out as a head coaching option for a lot of schools. People have been looking at him to take over their program. He's decided to stay, and we've been lucky to have him stay. But I think this would be the final straw, where if we go and get somebody who's maybe less experienced, or if we promote somebody else from within. A lot of people have thrown their hat into the ring for Dan Connor, who I love. I have his jersey. But I think that would be a real slap in the face to Poindexter if you promote Dan Connor over him. And I think Poindexter, there are rumors right now where Brent Pry is looking for a defensive coordinator at Virginia Tech, and he's looking to quite literally pry Anthony Poindexter away and take him to the Hokies. Who knows? I think Poindexter most likely gets the job, but I would not be shocked if we pulled in either of those other two guys. There are some people fighting for Al Golden. I don't think that's happening. I don't think that's happening one bit. So we'll see what happens. I hope it happens soon, but I think we'll be all right. And I think we'll be able to take some steps defensively. We lose some guys, but we also retain a ton of talent on that side of the ball. We retain so much talent offensively. There's so much to look forward to next year. And this is a team that now knows what it takes. They were so close. They were a couple plays away. I think they'll make those plays next year. I'm very, very excited. I'll be thinking about it nonstop. And I'll be thinking about you guys nonstop. Thank you for tuning in this entire season. And this has been a really long video. I have no idea what it will turn out to be in the final edit. But thank you for listening all this way. Thank you for listening this entire year. My name is Connor Griffin. And until next time, this has been Connor Griffin signing off. We are